Okay, well, it looks like we are starting to have critical mass. We have so much to talk about in a relatively short period of time. I'm Margaret Spellings, the president and CEO of Texas 2036, and I'm thrilled that we're hosting this conversation with two friends and colleagues who are totally steeped in the issues that we've been confronting over the last week to 10 days as a state around issues of energy and our grid and our capacity for resiliency. And so I would like to introduce them to you and tell you a tiny bit about Texas 2036 and why we are here. If ever there was a time to think long-term about the most important things and whether we're ready for the growth that we're going to be experiencing and the challenges ahead, this is what Texas 2036 is all about. And so I'm joined today by Pat Wood, who is a very serious Aggie from Port Arthur, Texas, has served in public policy, in and out of government, a leader in the private sector for many years. From 1995 to 2001, he served as the chairman of the Public Utility Commission of Texas. I give you those years because that's an important time for our grid and the creation of it, the genius behind it, and so forth. From there, Pat went on to become the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. I'm sure everyone on this learned group knows that, which he did from 2001 to 2005. So in addition to the Texas perspective, he also brings a very strong national perspective on these issues. Today, he is CEO of Hunt Energy Network, where, speaking of future focus, he is looking at new power system infrastructure, related business systems that go with that, and how we will continue to be a leader in energy. I also want to introduce Tracee Bentley, who will be moderating the conversation for the next few minutes, who is a board member of Texas 2036 and someone I've come to know and respect and enjoy working with. She is the CEO of the Permian Strategic Partnership, and they represent leading Permian Basin energy companies here and in New Mexico, here in Texas and in New Mexico. And they are working to make sure that they are good partners in the community around things like education and health, because they know that without well-developed human capital, they won't have a well-developed energy industry. So with that, I will turn to Tracee to moderate this conversation, and they will chat for a minute, and then we will open the floor for questions from you all, our friends and family. So Tracee, off to you.
Margaret, thank you for your leadership at Texas 2036. It's been an honor to serve on this board of a nonprofit guided by the mission of making sure Texas is the best place to live and work. It's also an honor to be the moderator of this very important discussion today. Pat, I know our audience is here to learn what your thoughts are about the events that occurred over the last couple of weeks and get your take on what the state should do to ensure this doesn't happen again. So let's begin. Pat, why don't we start with a brief history of Texas electricity market, and why does Texas have an independent electric grid, and why a deregulated competitive market?
Unmute.
That is the question of the day, Tracee. There are three and a half, if you count Quebec. They kind of are in and out, but there's a eastern interconnection of North America, and really a part of Mexico, but it's really Canada and the U.S. And then there's a western interconnection, and then there's the Texas interconnection, which we call ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas. It kind of formed when in 1978, some utilities in Oklahoma and Texas merged to become the old Central Southwest that y'all in the North Texas area know well, but that became AEP today. But when they did that, they became utilities and interstate commerce. And so that instantly put Texas under federal jurisdiction. And at the time, that mattered a lot to somebody in Texas. So they cut a deal with the new FERC at the time, which was the Federal Power Commission. And that became, and it kind of got enshrined in federal law and a later subsequent thing, but it just became this almost talismanic kind of thing that Texans like to hold up there, that I'm the only human alive that got to live on both sides of that divide, and I can tell each side to the other, there's nothing so great about it, and there's nothing so great not about it. So it just is what it is. But the nice thing for us, Tracee, was that it allowed us to move into a kind of integrated vision of a competitive market. We weren't dependent on the federal regulator to regulate wholesale power, which is what I got to do as chairman of FERC. That was the wholesale market. That's what we had statutory authority to do, is regulate power and interstate commerce. But we also regulate, and all the states do today, regulate the local sale of power. In some states, that's done by a regulated utility. In most of Texas, that's done in the competitive market. And you asked why we did it. Margaret's old boss and mine told me one day, he said, Pat, when he hired me, G.W. Bush said, Pat, the utilities care more about what we think, the government, the House, the Senate, and himself, than what their customers think, and that's wrong, and we're going to change it. So that really was my marching orders for 6 and then 4 more years, is to get this thing that used to be so regulated into an environment that is customer centric. And that's really, I'll just say it today as we kick off the call, what happened last week failed that vision. And I would just want to apologize to people of my great state for not getting all the guardrails right. I think we made some failures, and our legislature, I thought, was a pretty sober analysis yesterday. I think they'll pick up the pieces, but I helped put this one together, and I'll be around until my dying breath to make sure it's put back together again. But I got pretty PO'd that there wasn't a lot of ownership yesterday, but I'll be an owner. I helped do it, and it was the right thing to do, and we would do it again, but we got to build it back better, and we will.
So Pat, following up on that, based on your roles as both PUC chair when Texas chose to adopt the competitive market, and as FERC chair governing the national grid, can you tell us what advantages and disadvantages does the Texas electric market have versus other states?
So advantage was that one where we could put that vision of the full market together, the wholesale piece, because it really is integrated. The generation and sale of electricity, putting that into a common power pool, which we did here in Texas, and allowing those savings and those benefits, which have been substantial. The Wall Street Journal did a really drive-by piece last week, which was a shock for me to read out of them, because I hear this about once every 2 years. The opponents of competition try to act like the rates in Texas have gone up under competition. The exact opposite has happened. Rates have plummeted. We've gone from the 21st most expensive state on rates to the 43rd. And the only ones lower than us have federally subsidized hydropower. Well, there's a couple that are lower for normal reasons, like Oklahoma. But so the advantage was we got to put that vision together and make sure that those savings would flow through it can be done as regulator in the East, where you have a multi-state entities up there, PJM, ISO New England. The harmony between the feds and the state takes some finesse, but in a multi-state environment, there's not an alternative. But California, New York, and Texas all have their own individual ISOs, like we have here in ERCOT. And so that's much easier to make the whole system work, but not impossible. A disadvantage is one we saw last week. We aren't interconnected too well. We do have some legal interconnections, one that emanated from this midnight deal that got cut in 78 to keep Texas independent. We had some direct current ties in East Texas out there, kind of Marshall, Carthage area, and then one up near near Burke Burnett. And then the Hunt family, who I work with, built a DC tie to connect with Mexico about 20 years ago. So we've got about 1,000 megawatts, which out of a 80,000 megawatt system is a small part, but we connect to the other city, to the other states. But had we been more integrated, particularly to the West where the cold weather didn't hit so bad, it could have probably been a source of some relief, certainly not the level that we needed, but that would have been that's a disadvantage. I don't see a lot of other disadvantages to that system. We are the size of the UK power grid as far as number of, size of electrical load, and of Spain and Portugal, the Iberian grid, which we resemble in makeup. So, it may be the smallest of the three North American grids, but it's still substantially diverse and big enough size to make a difference.
Thank you. So from your perspective, what happened? How did freezing temperatures over a few days throw our entire system into disarray?
Well, I'm going to use my Zoom projection skills, which are getting very good in this last calendar year. Did that pop up?
Yep.
This is what happened the 2 weeks. So the key event was, and I'm using my cursor, so tell me if you don't see it. But this is when the power went out, starting on the early morning hours of President's Day, which is the 15th of February. But this was running up to that. The mix of power in Texas. This was a warmish, kind of 60-degree average across North and South Texas. Power stack. So we had the green is wind, the yellow is solar. So you see it kind of every day. Those were some nice sunny days, as I recall. The natural gas kind of picks up the slack. So it's on those days when the wind is blowing great, gas backs down. And even in this case, coal backed down on this day, the 8th of the week before, the Monday before. And then the red here is nuclear, which is kind of on all the time. Those plants are really hard to turn up and down. So it works pretty well where they just stay at the bottom here. But this is a great way to think about what happened. So the blue is temperature, I should add. This is what happens. Like I said, these were warmish days in the 70s, 60s, 50s. And it got cold. And so as it got cold, the gas picked up the slack. On colder days, the wind, we don't really count on wind a whole lot on the winter days. It's just a factor of how wind is made. I mean, it's the differentiation over elevation from north to south. But we had some slugs of wind there. Obviously, we have a lot more wind on the system in the spring, summer, and fall than we do in the winter. But in any event, wind and solar were a little thin on these days here. But this is when it got cold over the weekend. This is a Saturday here. This is Sunday here, Valentine's Day. And then this is the period that we love to talk. This is what happened right here. Demand dropped. Demand was going to be going the next morning. This is where this peak right here, 69.2, was a winter peak. The previous one was 65.8. And we just blew right past that here right after dinner on Valentine's Day. Boom, we went up, hit the peak, and then we got the peak started to come down and the load started to come down. What happened here was the polar vortex came right over came over the Red River. It absolutely cratered temperatures. Everybody's thermostat, people were asleep, so their thermostats kicked on automatically. A lot of people have natural gas heat, but a whole lot of people have electric resistance heating, which draws off the power system. If you can see how that can have an impact. But that's really where it happened. Right here was when the system became imbalanced, and the ERCOT, who is the air traffic controller who regulates the supply and demand to keep it at 60 hertz all the time so that wonderful light on your ceiling or the computer that's plugged in the wall stays working as it's designed, that dropped. And so when that frequency dropped, they had no choice but to react. Our alternative would have been a blackout of the whole system. And Tracee, I lived through that as regulator in 2003 when a utility in Ohio with bad tree maintenance effectively was the root cause of the blackout that took out a quarter of our continent in 2003 August. So that was that's what we did not have in Texas. But instead of that, we had to manage downward here to the fact that we lost a lot of capacity. We lost wind, we lost natural gas, we lost coal plants, and even the nuke tripped about 4 hours later. So this was a really response to a dramatic weather event. The meteorologist who testified yesterday at the Texas Senate mentioned that this was the third worst winter storm, most intense winter storm since they've been keeping data in Texas for 130 years. 1989 was number 2, and 1898 or 99 was number 1. So this was a significant event in its extent geographically, in its duration for the number of days, and in the intensity for how low the temperatures dropped. So I think we got to get used to this. Weather is changing. We can debate the reasons for that among educated and uneducated class. We need to all be talking off the same page, but the bottom line is the impacts are the same. We've got to look for a resilience here that we didn't have last week. So sorry to give a long answer, but I just think data is important, and we don't have all the data yet about what exactly happened next. So then, why did 158 generators trip? ERCOT has already sent out data requests. As an owner of a battery, I had to send my answer back in for my little facility that's actually not even commissioned yet. But we're going to find out why every single one of these tripped or wasn't available to the system, whether that's a windmill that got iced by the wet fog that was sub 32 degrees and just hit the cold blades and turned into a big icicle. Fascinating, looks like a science fiction movie. Or was it the cold piles were so, the dust in the cold piles just froze on contact with the freezing rain, or the gas, was the gas pressurized system, the gas wells froze off. We heard a lot of good data and good stories yesterday, but we've really got to analyze and figure out, was this really a maintenance problem on the power plants, or was it something more pervasive in the whole delivery system, particularly for natural gas?
Well, along those lines, given what we do know now, what actions could ERCOT, the generators, or other stakeholders have taken to avoid the situation that occurred?
Well, one that came up yesterday and again, when I refer to yesterday, it's still going on today, but the Texas House and the Texas Senate are both having simultaneous, unfortunately, hearing some kind of bipolar yesterday. And this is my oasis time today. But I would say the coordination effort between the regulators of gas and electric, here we're one of the only states where that's separated. I mean, the PUC is electric and the Railroad Commission is gas for historical reasons. That coordination, the communication was a big issue the legislators raised, and I agree with that. I think communicating to the public, ERCOT does put out conservation notices. I do think that made a difference on Valentine's night, when the conservation appeals went out that morning and asked people to reduce their demand. But again, we'd still hit that record peak, and we're set to hit. I should have mentioned on that prior slide, the next morning, Monday morning, President's Day morning, we were set to set an all-time system peak on a system that's a summer peaking system. We designed ERCOT in Texas to handle air conditioned load on that hot Thursday in August. And here we were on President's Day about to exceed that load. So again, this is really a significant outlying event, but it's the new normal. We've got a plan for that. But what could ERCOT have done? Clearly the forecasting and the scenario planning that takes place well in advance, not just days before when you see the polar vortex and the jet streams changing and all the meteorological stuff. But when you see that changing, it's too late. But if you could have advanced seen it, which they did a study in October that modeled our extreme response, in which case we would have just barely made it without any sort of rolling blackouts. In October, they scaled that off at the 2011 storm, which was again, a significant event when we had outages last, but about 1/5 the scale of outages that we had this year. So 2011 was a big deal. This was a way bigger deal. Mm-hmm. So I think what else could ERCOT have done? Could everybody have done it? Sounded to me, and this is just my reaction as just an educated person listening to the testimony that's been given so far, is the coordination between the gas and the electric industries poor. It's both are market based, which is great. I support that, but transparency and clarity of the guardrails is just not there. And so that level of communication was important. I do think some of the market operations, in most every market that we know well, New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, there are circuit breakers, but we have a price cap at $9,000 a megawatt hour. For comparison for the audience, the price is usually about $30. Maybe in a hot summer, it'll hit 9,000 for an hour or two. It was at $9,000 most of Valentine's Day and the next, not most of, part of Valentine's Day and then most of the 15th, even after we had curtailed load, the pricing was coming in. And then the PUC administrated, we set that price at $9,000 to entice generation to come back in. That decision's a tough one. I can talk about that later, but I think that those kind of reactions probably, though, I think those kind of things were done at the spur of the moment to try to really get the system frequency back to 9 to 60 hertz. And I think, again, the ERCOT folks were heroic for what they did, but the important thing to come away from this is let's not get in this position again. And we only do that if we can do good quality planning. And if we don't get the response from the market that we should get, then we should change the incentives or put some requirements in place. I mean, I'm never, as a former regulator and even a bushy, I've never been afraid of putting a rule in place if we absolutely have to have it to make things work.
Now, this has caused a lot of talk about Texas's energy mix, which energy sources delivered and which did not. And you touched on this a little bit earlier. But from your perspective, what is the right balance?
We kind of trusted the market to do that so far. And I think this is probably going to be one of those events that market information steps back. I don't know if the implication for that will be more of a slowdown in renewable energy or if it'll speed it up, because now that we've got other technology like batteries and all that are much more cost effective. I mean, that's what I do for a job. I've seen that just in the last 24 months. We never thought about batteries except for some science experiment. Now it's a real deal because the cost has come down, mostly pushed by the electric vehicle industry that's really got the economies of scale down and a very similar chemistry that we use for standard batteries. But even a battery would not have gotten us through 4 days of this. A battery can hold power for at most 4 hours. And while that probably would have helped that frequency event at 1:37 in the probably 1:55 in the morning on the 15th, that and gotten that frequency kind of to come back up to 60, which would make everybody calm, because that just means supply and demand are at balance in real time. That's what we really have to do. And that's what ERCOT's job is, keep that in balance at all time. And if you can't do more to ink up supply, you got to ink down demand so that those things are equal. That's really what they do. And they did what they're supposed to do. It's the planning role and the lead up to that really is not just the ERCOT's job. It's the PUC, it's the Railroad Commission, it's the Texas Energy Coordination Council, which is a new reliability council, which was formed in the mid when Rick Perry was still here. So that, those things, that's what they should be doing. And I think we can really energize their job to get that done in the future. I mean, that's really, when I heard the sober questioning from the legislators yesterday, they're hell-bent to get the right answer and fix this. And I love that. I mean, that, the industry was not looking real great with all the finger pointing, but the people that have to vote seem to me to have the right mindset that this is a problem. We're going to fix it, and we're going to fix it in the right way, not overreact, not underreact, but, Goldilocks, just right. Keep my fingers crossed. But I think, I'm sorry, back to Tracee, the mix, it's gonna, because of Texas's blessing and resources, we got a lot under the ground and we got a lot above the ground with wind and solar. We're really the testing ground, probably, if not for the nation, maybe even for the world, for how a future power system is going to be made and how it's going to develop and how it's going to grow. And if we don't get it right here, nobody will get it right. So I've always loved in our career to look at other markets about what we can learn from them and get it and do it right. So we're always, pioneers get shot, but settlers get the land. It was always okay for a Texan to be second, rarely, but this time we got to be first, because no one else is going to have the level of renewable energy penetration that we do. It'll come, it'll probably be expensive other places. It's cheap here and it's plentiful here. And then adding that to natural gas and the coal and nuclear that we have, I love all of the above. I always have. I do think this last week reemphasizes the absolute imperative need for all of the above. We needed gas. Sometime it wasn't there. So coal picked it up. Coal dropped a little bit. The nukes picked it up, but nuke dropped a little bit. And then there was wind, but we weren't counting on much. But even that wasn't what we didn't even get that. And then of course there wasn't any solar in the middle of the night. But so it was a subpar performance by all of our energy resources, which probably indicates the need that we need a thicker cushion. But I can't imagine, as I age and love my rest of my years in Texas, that we're ever going to have to be without particularly natural gas. And, I know the folks don't like carbon coming out of coal because it's a lot more coming out of coal than out of gas, but we'll find some way to deal with the carbon, but we can't do it by saying we won't use you any more gas, or we won't use you any more coal. It's just not, that's not going to happen after what happened last week. I think the nation and the world has to take knowledge that the diversity of our resources is our strength.
Now, as you know, Texas wholesale market is more than 25 years old. Its retail competitive market opened 20 years ago. And over that time frame, we've had among the lowest electricity rates in the country, as you said earlier. And outside of what happened a couple of weeks ago, only a limited number of reliability issues, and certainly none at the level that we just saw. There are obviously a number of ideas being floated to change the market. So I wanted to talk about a couple of these and how they might impact the market. And some of these ideas are winterizing all power plants and natural gas drilling, connecting ERCOT's grid to other grids in the country so we can tap generation from outside when we need it, or moving away from an energy-only market to a capacity market. What are your thoughts on these?
So I'll take them first. I think I want to see where the facts come out on the winterization. The governor has put that as a charge for the legislature to do winterization discussion and then how to pay for it. Let's find out how many weren't winterized, because the testimony yesterday from the big three, the three largest generators, indicated that after 2011, if not before, they got the message to winterize. So let's find out what they did to winterize and what winterize means. Because if you put something in a box like we do up in Pennsylvania, I was a chairman of a company that owned a lot of power plants in the Midwest when they got a polar vortex. You put something inside a house, that's great for the winter, but our summers are hot as hell. So inside a house that's not air conditioned, you winterize something that needs to be summerized too. So it's a toughie. I mean, we do have an extreme climate here, and everybody in Minnesota is saying, well, our wind blades work and our gas works. I'm like, well, yeah, all your stuff is set up for winter and you don't have anything happen in the summer. We got to do both. So we got to be twice as good. But of course we're Texan and we know that, but so winterizing plants, winterizing gas, yes and yes, but let's find out just how much of that was the problem. We actually heard yesterday that some of the gas wellheads lost their electricity in the rolling brownouts, and so then it was a death spiral down. So that's one. ERCOT grid connecting the other parts of the country. I think I mentioned a little earlier that could have probably been some incremental, and there's actually an approved project that's been approved at the PUC, and that FERC's actually said, we're fine with this. This won't change your unique jurisdictional status, ERCOT. You can build it. So we do have the ability to that's kind of one of those fake issues, like when caused the blackouts. Well, no, it didn't. Look at the facts. But the Texas needs to be interconnected with the rest of the country. It's like, well, we kind of are, and we can enhance that, and that won't really change anything. It'll allow for more in and outs, but it won't change the jurisdiction, which I think people just want to stick it to our prior governor about that comment. But we can do both. We can interconnect Texas more and still be jurisdictionally independent. And then you said something about energy only market to a capacity market. I actually did advocate that when Governor Perry was asked me to come in and debate it with him. It was a great conversation, similar to the ones I had with Governor Bush. Very substantive policy discussion. He invited three of us in to talk about capacity market in 2013. And so we looked at it and thought about it. And actually he said, well, you guys go then help recommend it, because it's getting to be a big political issue. And so we wrote an op-ed to kind of indicate maybe we need to have an insurance premium paid for a little capacity margin here. We could design it to be different than the kind of big fat programs are up in the Northeast. We're pretty good at being cheap down here, but let's design something right. And, I don't know that that would have made a difference here, Tracee, last week, but it might have, we've done things since then that I think get you to the same point as far as financial incentive and financial rewards that the Eastern markets do with capacity. But I would say that issue is a big one that we should not address in this legislative session. It is a deep, complex issue. I think the $9,000 price cap, though, clearly we've got to rethink how that works. That, if maybe just putting a circuit breaker on it that says, after so long, we're going to stop and then kind of drop back to kind of cost-based efforts. I have to think through that. I heard that discussion last night, but we recommended a circuit breaker in 2013 along with the capacity market, because that's kind of how you do it. But anyway, for reasons not to bore you with, we didn't do that because ERCOT revisited the numbers and said, actually 2017, we're not going to have a power crisis because we're looking at our projections and they look better. So I think that one might be the one we kick the can on, but the winterizing issue is definitely front and center.
Thanks. I think we have time for just one more question. Technology and innovation are disrupting and improving many industries. When you look at the future, what innovations do you see that might change our electricity grid or energy markets? And I'm specifically talking about energy storage, microgrids, distributed generation.
Well, as I think I mentioned, I'm doing energy storage with the Hunt Energy Group right now and love it. I do think that a resilient system of the future, and again, we saw every system challenge, not just electric, but gas and water, and even our highway system. A lot of the guys that reported back in at the legislature, and to some of my other friends, it's been a busy week, could not even get physically to the well to get it back on, because it was a half inch of just ice over all West Texas. And so it was a toughie. So, the overall infrastructure, in the Northeast, they have trucks with salt and they salt the roads and it kind of works. And we don't have that kind of thing. It probably, with the weather trajectory, we probably ought to plan to have full weatherization issues. That's going to cost money. I think we've got to plan for that. But anyway, the strong grid of the future, Tracee, I think is going to be one that's decentralized. We've had this really robust kind of central power plant with long transmission lines connecting all of Texas. That'll be here still, but I think beefing up those peripheries and even beefing up urban centers where they could weather events like last week as a little island alone, and then come back together in the integrated grid. It's like the old utility regulated system was years ago, when you had Texas Power and Light and Houston Power and Light and Corpus Christi Power and Light and all these ones and then they were interconnected. But then Texas got urban, we got suburban, we got big. We do have a lot of empty spaces, but not as much as we used to. And so that whole interconnected system then built up in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It's probably time to do something to bet on both. Keep the central system strong, robust, and stout, but also beef up those technology. And the ones you mentioned, storage and microgrids and distributed generation, those are really I think the backbones technologies that you'll see. There'll be new ones with hydrogen and other things that come out, but that kind of resiliency that would allow you to get through periods like this in a way that we just didn't get done last week, when we had the extensive outages for longer periods of time than anybody ever thought.
Sure. Thank you, Pat. I think it's time to bring Margaret back into our conversation, and then we'll move into question and answers from the audience.
Thank you very much, Tracee and Pat. Great conversation. And I'm sitting here monitoring the chat on some of these audience questions, one of which was mine. Reputationally, people around the country are loving the Texas braggadocios, those mighty Texans, on our heels last week. What will it take to restore our reputation on this issue, as well as just the trust and confidence from our own citizens, Pat?
Well, one, I think is some Well, first of all, as you and I both know, the world probably is a little bit better off with humbler Texans. So we and I just anyway, but I think we owe it to our fellow Texans to own the problem. And the finger pointing yesterday was disheartening, but we will get to the bottom of the facts. We'll figure it out. I'm worried that we're going to take too long to do it to keep our competitive retail sector and some of the co-ops and munis who are still fully regulated utilities inside the state. They participate in the wholesale market just like you and I do in the deregulated market. They're individual customers and they buy for their citizens. If they were short, they had to buy power at $9 a kilowatt hour. That's a whole lot of money, and it added up really quick. So I do think that we've got to be humble, but we've also got to be smart. And I think we can do that. I mean, I remember watching you do it on education, asking people for the best ideas that'll work. I do sense that we have a very good market model here. I'm not just saying that because I helped do it. It's gotten a lot better since I left, I should say, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It has been a huge tool for economic development for the state. We've got to continue it, but we've also got to make it sustainable. And it's not right now. What happened last week was a severe kick, and we've got to make sure we react to the kick with smart policies. And we will. I really believe that as long as we don't overreact to the crisis or underreact to the crisis, but kind of Goldilocks it,
Exactly.
We'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to grow another 10 million people over the next 15 years into our bicentennial. Texas, our energy reliability and affordability has been a major competitive advantage, and obviously want to keep it that way. So one of the good questions from the audience is, what do you see as the major, misunderstandings or misinformation that's coming at Texans, making it difficult for us to create the policy environment to have, rational, sound approaches?
There's one of the things, and I haven't really talked about this publicly, but it's important to think about with a group like this is the implication of federal policies. I've actually been a humongous fan of renewable energy. I have the renewable plan for my own house, and I've got solar panels on the roof. But when you have an energy only market that is really becoming increasingly affected by wind power, and wind is getting pretty substantial credit back they have a volumetric subsidy. So it's not just like a tax credit, like you send your kids to private school, you get a tax credit. It is every single kilowatt hour you generate, you get $24 per megawatt hour back. Well, that's about as much as the market cost for regular power today, $24, $35 a megawatt hour. So they're actually getting that as a tax credit. If we had a few windmills on the side, that'd be one thing, but we're the fifth largest nation in the world in wind power. So we got humongous amounts of power with this kind of extra little slug kind of on the back flowing into our energy market. And the energy market's all we have. That's how we're setting prices and sending price signals. And as good as that is for and solar, by contrast, gives you capital credit. So if you spend $1 million on solar plant and you get 30% of that back on your next tax bill, that's an incentive, but it's not one that you kind of live and has the distortive effect for 10 years after you claim the credit. So we got to be mindful of that. And I mean, I don't want the Green New Deal crowd to come after and crucify me, but we got to talk the truth that is a distortive thing. It probably resulted in some plants getting run out of the market sooner than they should have. And so we've just got to be honest about it and say, okay, how can we have our cake and eat it too, with getting a diverse fuel supply here on the grid, but not doing it in a way that really forces uneconomic decisions to be made. And then the implications of that flow through to the retail marketers. They've got to, live in that market. So we create these $9,000 price caps to kind of ask the gas guys, come on back, or don't shut down so quick. And then, that then becomes a really big issue, like happened last week, where you've got $9,000 megawatt hour prices that little competitive retailers, and look, Vistra just announced today they're taking a $900 million to $1.3 billion write down on last week. Vistra, our biggest utility.
Yeah.
So that was the shocker. I think I woke up and saw that and thought, good God, what the hell? Who got the money?
Yeah.
Because if they didn't, and NRG sure didn't sound like they were going to be announcing that yesterday from Mauricio's comments. So, the financial piece, we talk about the reliability piece this whole time, but I will tell you what, we ought to have another call following up on the financial piece, because it's humongous.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big issue.
I'm going to try to fit two questions in, so they're different, but I'm going to ask them at the same time in hopes that you'll answer both. One is, obviously there have been some major changes at ERCOT as of yesterday. What is next for that organization? And you're right, they're the air traffic controller. So that's first one. And secondly, and I think as we head into planning for the spring and summer, why is one polar vortex different from or so debilitating compared to, dozens of back-to-back 100+ days all over Texas? I mean, how should we be thinking about heat in the summer and the capacity of our grid as well?
Okay, that's a good question. And just for the audience folks, she's feeding me these things just live. We don't rehearse this stuff. But the quick answer to that one is, in the winter, gas has two levers: the residential home heater and the electric generator, and they've got to pick. In the summer, it is one goal, and that's feeding the generation plant so we can run the air conditioning. It is really simple. We are a summer design system, and as you can tell, when you just got that one thing, gas is not an issue. So gas supply is, but the big three blackouts in the recent years have all been in the winter, January or February. And it's like, well, why is that? It's because gas is going two ways. So ERCOT, I just hate the xenophobic thing that, Texas has to have Texans running ERCOT, our Electric Reliability Council. I mean, I understand the optics, but my God, Davy Crockett wasn't a Texan. He came from Tennessee. So why we can't, make it work with this bright woman who used to work for me. Actually, she was chairman of the Michigan Commission in a great bipartisan state. She was a phenomenal regulator. She retired from that commission and was snapped up to chair ERCOT. I wrote everybody, I said, how wonderful that Sally Talberg is chairman of ERCOT, because she's one of the smartest people in the country. And we get run off because you're not from Texas. I mean, the Californians pulled this same number on me in 2003 when we were trying to pick up the pieces from their blackout. And but they ended up with a 5-member board. Fortunately, California has 50 million people, so you can find 5 people out of that. We've got 30 or something. We'll find 5 bright people, but it's a slap. But the organization, based on what I read, the body language yesterday, will probably go through a restructuring at its governance level by the legislature, and it is spelled out in the statute from after we left to go to DC. But that they did put in the statute specific kind of board composition for ERCOT. So that's probably one change you will expect.
Okay. All right. Well, we are at our time, and I am going to say a quick, giant thank you to you, Tracee Bentley, and to you, Pat, for your expertise, for being involved, for leading us out of this wilderness. I know you're going to be central to the conversations. So appreciate you, and have a great weekend, everybody, on the call, and appreciate your participation with us today for this super timely event. All the best.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Tracee.
Thanks, Pat. See you.